In a world where everyone's always talking, posting, sharing, explaining, there's one rare skill that gives you real power: silence. Not awkward silence, not passive silence, but strategic silence. The kind that makes people curious, the kind that keeps them guessing. While others rush to reveal their thoughts, their goals, their next steps, the smartest ones stay quiet. They listen, they observe. And when they do speak, it matters. Centuries ago, Niccolò Machiavelli understood this better than most. He knew that silence wasn't weakness. It was a strategy, a way to hold your position, protect your ideas, and stay in control. Because every time you speak, you give something away. A thought, a plan, a weakness. And once it's out there, you can't take it back. But silence protects you. It gives you room to move, room to change, and room to win without ever announcing your next move. The more you explain yourself, the more predictable you become. The more you talk, the easier it is to be judged, copied, or challenged. But when you stay silent, you stay powerful. You stay mysterious, you stay in charge. Think about the loudest person in the room. They're rarely the smartest. The real players, the real strategists, they don't need to talk all the time. Their silence speaks for them. So next time you're about to speak just to fill the space, don't. Watch, listen. Let others reveal their hand. And when the time is right, speak with purpose. Until then, let your silence do the work. Whoever speaks first loses in relationships. It explains why the person who listens more than they speak often understands the dynamics better than the constant talker in competitions. It's why those who announce their strategies before executing them typically underperform relative to their capabilities. The second type is authority building silence. Machiavelli understood that power depends partly on perception, and perception can be enhanced through calculated reticence. A prince must imitate the fox and the lion, for the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. He wrote, "Part of the fox's cunning is knowing when speech diminishes rather than enhances authority." Authority-building silence works because humans naturally fill information gaps with assumptions that often favor the silent party. When a leader speaks selectively, addressing only significant issues rather than every minor concern, their words carry greater weight when someone responds to criticism only when truly necessary, rather than defensively answering every charge they project, confidence rather than insecurity. This explains why the most powerful figures in any domain typically speak less but more deliberately than those beneath them. The nervous junior executive overtalks the CEO, makes brief, decisive statements. The insecure person explains at length, the secure person states without justification. The anxious leader responds to provocation. The confident leader selectively engages only when strategically valuable. Want to understand more about using strategic silence to your advantage? Hit subscribe. Now the third type is ambiguity. Preserving silence since it is difficult. To join them together, it is safer to be feared than to be loved when one of the two must be lacking. Machiavelli advised this famous observation extends beyond fear and love to all situations where maintaining multiple interpretations serves strategic interests. Ambiguity. Preserving silence allows others to project their own hopes, fears, and interpretations onto your position. By refusing to clarify, you can simultaneously appeal to different constituencies with contradictory expectations. You maintain freedom of action by not committing to specific interpretations. You preserve deniability by not explicitly endorsing any particular understanding. Politicians master this approach by making statements vague enough that different audiences hear what they want to hear. Effective negotiators use it by avoiding clear positions that would prematurely narrow potential agreements. Leaders employ it by articulating vision without unnecessarily constraining implementation details in each case. Strategic silence isn't deception. It's the recognition that premature clarity often undermines rather than advances objectives. As Machiavelli observed, politics have no relation to morals in his view. Effective strategy requires maintaining flexibility that excessive Communication would compromise the psychological power of silence beyond its tactical advantages. Machiavellian silence exerts powerful psychological effects that speech cannot achieve understanding. These effects explains why silence often succeeds, where persuasion fails. First, silence creates projection spaces. Human minds instinctively fill informational voids, often in ways that reflect their own preoccupations, rather than reality. When you remain silent at key moments, others project their fears, hopes, or assumptions onto that silence, revealing their position, while you maintain yours, as Machiavelli noted. Men are so simple and so much inclined to obey immediate needs that a deceiver will never lack victims for his deceptions. The strategic use of silence leverages this tendency without requiring active deception. This explains why skilled interrogators use silence rather than questions to elicit information from reluctant subjects. The discomfort of silence compels the subject to fill the void, often revealing more than direct. The same dynamic operates in negotiations, where the side that tolerates silence typically secures better terms than the side that nervously fills pauses with concessions. Second, silence establishes dominance in communication dynamics. The person who speaks first most frequently or at greatest length subtly positions themselves as seeking approval or validation from listeners. The person who speaks less, more selectively, or only after others have committed to positions implicitly claims the judge's role rather than the supplicant's. Machiavelli would recognize this as an expression of his principle that it is better to be feared than loved. The silent party is not necessarily loved, but their restraint often commands a respect that valuability cannot. This dynamic explains why job candidates who ask more questions often perform better than those who talk more about themselves. It explains why the quiet person in meetings often receives more serious consideration than vocal participants. It explains why respectful silence in conflicts often proves more effective than passionate argument. In each case, silence shifts the power dynamic by inverting the typical pattern of seeking approval through speech. Third, silence creates mystique that amplifies perceived power. As Machiavelli observed, men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see, to few, to feel what cannot be fully seen or understood often appears more formidable than what's completely. The person who shares everything, their thoughts, emotions, plans, and fears, soon becomes ordinary, predictable, easy to read, easy to counter. But the one who speaks selectively, they remain a mystery, and that mystery creates power. In leadership, this difference is massive. A leader who explains every detail of their thinking invites comparison. They make their role seem reachable, replaceable. But a leader who shares only the conclusion, not the process, keeps others wondering. That mystery builds authority. This isn't about lying or being fake. It's about being smart. Leadership isn't just about skill. It's about perception. And sometimes people only follow those they believe know more than they do. But here's the problem. Today's world loves transparency. People are told to just be real, to share everything, to be 100% open. And while that sounds noble, it's not always wise. Machiavelli said it perfectly. The promise given was a necessity of the past. The word broken is a necessity of the present. In other words, what helped you yesterday might trap you today. That's the danger of full transparency. It locks you into past statements, past feelings, past plans. You lose the freedom to adapt, you lose your edge. Again, this isn't about lying. It's about strategic disclosure. Say what helps your mission. Hold back what doesn't. Share when it gives you strength. Stay silent when it keeps you strong. In modern life, we fall into the transparency trap all the time. At work, we share ideas before they're ready. In meetings, we speak before we think. In negotiations, we reveal our position before we know theirs. Even in personal life, we confess too much, too soon. We explain plans that aren't final. We open up emotions that aren't fully understood. But Machiavelli would say, this isn't authenticity. It's giving up power. It makes you easy to predict, easy to influence, easy to ignore. Real influence doesn't come from saying more. It comes from saying what matters and holding back what doesn't. Strategic silence isn't weakness. It's discipline. So ask yourself, is what I'm about to say helping my goal, or am I just filling the air? Sometimes silence is not empty, it's full of power. Silence. First, practice information asymmetry before sharing your position on any consequential matter. Ensure you understand others' positions. First, ask questions rather than making statements. Listen for what remains unsaid rather than responding only to what's explicitly stated, as Machiavelli advised. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. The fox's cunning begins with gathering information while revealing little. This approach proves particularly valuable in negotiations, where understanding the other party's true constraints and priorities often matters more than articulating your own. It applies equally in workplace dynamics, where knowing colleagues' concerns and motivations before committing to positions prevents unnecessary conflict and enables more effective influence. Second, cultivate strategic ambiguity when clarity would prematurely limit options. This doesn't mean being deliberately confusing, but maintaining flexibility by avoiding unnecessary specificity. A prince should therefore be very slow to believe and to act, nor should he himself show fear. Machiavelli counseled this slowness. To commit preserves freedom of action in leadership context. This might mean articulating vision and objectives, while leaving implementation details open for adaptation in personal relationships. It could involve expressing commitment to shared goals while maintaining flexibility about specific paths in competitive situations. It would mean keeping strategies private while opponents reveal theirs. Third, develop comfort with silence as a power position. Most people experience silence in conversation as uncomfortable and rush to fill it, often revealing more than intended or making unnecessary concessions. Training yourself to embrace these moments rather than filling them creates significant advantage in negotiations. This manifests as allowing silence after stating your position, rather than nervously qualifying or weakening it in conflicts. It appears as listening completely to criticism before responding rather than interrupting with defenses in leadership. It emerges as delivering decisions without unnecessary justification, trusting the decision to stand on its merits. The strategic whisper. Machiavelli's strategy of silence doesn't advocate never speaking. It advocates speaking only when speech serves your objectives better than. Silence doesn't mean hiding everything. The true master of this strategy isn't mute. He just knows exactly what to say and what to hold back. Machiavelli said, "The vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances, and the world is full of them." In other words, most people judge based on what they see, and they're always watching. That's why those who speak less and more carefully stand out. Their words carry weight. Their opinions spark curiosity. Their influence spreads, not because they talk a lot, but because they talk wisely. This level of control takes discipline. It's rare. It means staying quiet when you really want to speak. It means resisting the urge to explain yourself, to overshare, or to win small moments of validation. It means waiting, listening, watching. And then, when the moment is right, speaking in a way that shifts the entire room. These skills don't come naturally in a world addicted to noise, but that's exactly why they're so powerful. Silence has become a superpower because so few have the strength to use it. And here's the greatest irony. The people who master this silent strategy rarely get noticed. We notice the loud ones, the oversharers, the ones always trying to prove something. But the silent strategists, they win without explaining how. They rise without needing attention. While others are still talking about success, they've already achieved it. Maybe that's why Niccolo Machiavelli himself is so misunderstood. People see him as cold or ruthless. But his true genius wasn't manipulation. It was understanding how humans work. He knew that real power doesn't always come from force, or even persuasion. Sometimes it comes from saying nothing, from letting others speak too soon, show too much, reveal their hand. In today's world of endless opinions, non-stop content, and constant sharing, Machiavelli's strategy feels radical. Say less, watch more, reveal only what helps, and let your results speak louder than your words. Because in the game of power, the quiet ones don't just survive, they win.